This is the fourth in the six-part series on the impact of Middle East Islamist radicalism on America, which we've been running every Monday as a joint program by American Jewish University and the Middle East Forum. On September 23rd, we covered the impact on American college campuses and academia. On September 30, we covered the impact on American politics and elections. Last Monday, on October 7th, we tried to put October 7th from a year ago into perspective 1 year later and predict what was going to happen in the coming year. And if you missed any of these three sessions, you can find them on the AJU YouTube site. Today, we're going to cover the conservative media coverage of Islamism in the Middle East and discuss the strengths and weaknesses of its reporting and analysis. We're joined by two distinguished experts, Jim Hanson and David Reaboi. Jim is the chief editor for the Middle East Forum. He previously served in the U.S. Army Special Forces and conducted counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, and foreign internal defense operations in more than 24 countries. He's the author of several books, including Winning the Second Civil War Without Firing a Shot and Cut Down the Black Flag, A Plan to Defeat ISIS. David is a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy and the author of Qatar's Shadow War, the Islamist Emirate and its Information Operations in the United States. He's published in American Greatness, The Federalist, Claremont Review of Books, The Washington Times, and elsewhere. So, David, I think I'm going to turn it over to you first and let you discuss your findings, some of the things that you have discovered and some of your analysis, and then we'll go to Jim.
Sure. Thank you, Rick, and thank you to the AJU for having me. I appreciate your your interest in this topic, which I think is a very important one right now. So I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about the relationship of conservative media to the Islamist topic. And in order to do that, it kind of makes sense to rewind quite a bit to the time before social media, to the time before, frankly, the internet and all that, to the time of the mainstream media and talk radio. And this was around the time of the Iraq War, the first World Trade Center attack in 1993, and all the way up to the first and second intifadas. And so at that time, we had a conservative media that amounted to a bunch of magazines and, frankly, talk radio. And that was it. The mainstream media was left since the Lebanon War of '82. It had been growing progressively more anti-Israel, and when the first Intifada kicked off is when it became more and more anti-Israel as the days went on. I grew up in New Jersey, right outside New York City, in the New York radio and news market. So there are a lot of Jews there, so there was a lot of reporting on Israel. Both on talk radio and also in the papers and things like that. So it was an issue that for us was probably covered in greater depth than if you were to live in elsewhere in the country with a different demographic breakdown. And then around the time of 9/11. By the time that came around, and we really saw the effects of Islamism on our shores and in terms of terrorist attacks against the United States. By then, it was the early blogging days. It was the days of, of the Drudge Report, and then also microblogging. You had a lot of folks who just said, you know what, I'm just going to go start a blog and write about the things that I care about. And of course, after 9/11, it made a lot of sense that a considerable number of those folks who were doing it were talking about this issue. They were talking about Islamism and foreign policy and and things like that. You had blogs like Little Green Footballs, which at the time was probably the biggest one dealing with this issue. You had Andrew Sullivan's blog, Daily Dish, that was dealing with this as well. A lot of those writers at the time were not exactly coming from movement conservatism. They kind of called themselves or thought of themselves as 9/11 neocons, which is mugged by reality. Americans who were, you know, not left wing, but definitely in the center, and then moved right after 9/11 to address the threat of Islamism. Now, at that time, and I was much younger at that time, right after 9/11 as well, and I can say that that we were all kind of learning about the problem at the same time because it had arrived on our shores, and we were engaged in a very quick educational project on who these guys are, starting with the Muslim Brotherhood and moving to Al Qaeda, moving to groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. And then years go by, and we get into the market consolidation era. And at that point, you had some conservative magazines, let's say the conservative media itself. We still had talk radio, still had no access to mainstream media, but companies decided, hey, let's recreate what amounted to internet newspapers on the right. So you had larger sites like Hot Air and things like that, PJ Media, and sort of websites like that went and hired writers and put together what amounts as an internet newspaper covering a wide range of topics, not just Islamism, but also domestic policy and other things. Basically, what was going on in the news. And with that, you saw a specialization in the folks who were covering the Islamist issue. It turned into a niche, in other words, and that was the time of that was kind of the waning days of the Iraq War, and frankly, nobody was interested in anything foreign anymore. They were anxious to move on from the Iraq War, and it became a super niche topic. Now, following that, in the early days of social media, people started to go on Twitter, and we saw the Arab Spring, and we saw different movements like that. We saw Brexit, we saw the Donald Trump victory in 2016, and around that time, what happened with social media is you have many different nodes in the conservative world, and some folks focus on Islamism, some folks focus on Second Amendment stuff, some folks focus on abortion or whatever. Everyone has their little particular silo of issues that they really care about or know about, and when something pops up in the news, then let's say the weight of conservative media will go and will say, okay, we know who is going to address this particular topic. And when things come up in the news, then conservative media knows where to go to get let's say to get credible analysis on that topic. And that kind of brings us into today, and it brings us into the current crisis. And I know that we wouldn't be having this particular webinar if these issues were not significant. So here's the state of play. So since we're now in kind of 2.0 era of social media, where let's say post 2020, where we've had millions of new users jump on, some of whom are boomers, some of whom are Gen Z folks. And that really changed the makeup of what's happening. It changed the way that um, that social media works, and frankly, a lot of it is driven by economics. How do you make a living? You can make a living on social media, whereas prior to that, it was very, very difficult. So how do you do that? You do that by becoming a you do that by amassing a large number of followers and then monetizing that follower account, either by taking money sort of behind the scenes to push a particular narrative, or now you've got rules of X, which will literally pay out to you for impressions, which of course leads to common denominator stuff. It leads to fake news. It leads to disinformation. It leads to um, the possibility of very cynical folks wanting to maximize their following and maximize their profits by goosing their engagements and saying things that are not true or silly or ridiculous or etc. So into that do we have at the same time the complete collapse of legitimacy of the mainstream media on a variety of topics, from COVID to RussiaGate to basically anything you can think of. Joe Biden being completely competent to serve to serve as president of the United States until boom, one day he's no longer competent, and then he's replaced by Kamala Harris, who had sworn up and down that he's completely fine. Um, and the people look around and they look at one another and they notice this and they say, these people in the mainstream media are lying to us, and they've been lying to us for quite a while. How long that is, that's an open question, but we're 100% sure that they're lying to us now. So this environment, together with the explosion of social media, is catnip for conspiracy theories. And it was around 2020 that I saw this people would start to say things like prove it didn't happen, which of course is the opposite how you do analysis. You have to say, okay, prove to me how it happened. But if you say prove to me it didn't happen, then you can come up with any absurd hypothesis you want, and it's impossible to prove a negative. So the proliferation of conspiracy theories is very dangerous, but I understand it in the sense that it explains things, that it makes you feel better about your situation in many ways, because it says, okay, there are powerful people who are controlling things, even if it's for ill. But if I know about it, and maybe then we can do something about it, we can fix the problem in a snap. Whereas the truth of the matter is, it's very messy. Nobody knows what they're doing. Um, there isn't a big giant mechanism controlling everything, and frankly, people find that scary, and they look to conspiracy theories to that kind of explain things to kind of calm them down. It's a security blanket because they don't want to face the reality of the situation that we're in, which is quite bleak. So into that into that situation, you have bad actors of one kind or another. So on one hand, you have people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Jackson Hinkle and Jake Shields and a whole bunch of folks who are speaking to um, disaffected people who are kind of ready to believe anything, and they're being fed, frankly, um, straight up hardcore anti-Semitism of a kind that, would be absolutely familiar from the blood libel days. And it's very difficult to see where this energy is coming from. You see it online, you see an explosion of it on Twitter or X, for example. But it's hard to know exactly how much of it is real and how much of it is fake, because at the same time, you've also got foreign state actors who have been, for the last many years, trying to inject pro-Islamist narratives or chaos-centered narratives into the conversation. So, for example, Qatar, I wrote a book about it called Qatar's Shadow War. They've been very, very active in this field, pushing anti-Israel stuff, pushing anti-American stuff, pushing pro-Hamas stuff, and so forth. And for example, they invested a big chunk into the conservative site Newsmax. They pumped millions of dollars into this country via a loophole, which is the Qatari government funded the 9/11 families lawsuit. And they're able then to use the lawsuit to give money to Americans, in the name of litigation support that is not under the Foreign Agent Registration Act. So they've been doing that. They've been paying off, tons of people in the media and radio talk show hosts and writers and other folks. And then in addition to that, you've got the bots. You don't know what's real. You don't know what's fake. And we see a lot of these massive anti-Semitic, anti-Israel accounts with a crazy amount of likes and retweets and different types of engagements. We really don't know what's real. I mean, I think it would behoove Elon Musk to get to the bottom of it, because it does hurt his business. Nobody likes to go on to Twitter and see this stuff nonstop, especially since so much of it is coming from foreign state actors. And we've traced the networks, whether it's Iran paying Gray Zone on the left to put stuff out, or the Russians being involved in anti-Israel, pro-Assad stuff since propaganda online since about 2015, since they got involved in the Syria war. You've got China and TikTok, or China using its TikTok to push out anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian messages, pro-Islamist messages. So all that is the state of play. It's confusing, and it's a wild time, especially if you log on to social media. It can be absolutely dispiriting. However, the silver lining is that the right and the Republican Party, really at all levels, at all important levels, still supports Israel strongly, still stands against anti-Semitism, and is kind of revolted by it. Both the voters and the institutional apparatus of the party is still absolutely pro-Israel, still absolutely against anti-Semitism. We have a. I'm sorry?
I want to come back
Yeah.
to X, Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, the X algorithm, and how that impacts that. But I want to give Jim a chance to chime in here on either what you've said or what he's found, and then maybe I'll direct some questions to both of you.
Sure.
I can actually I can comment on X as a platform and the changes they're making to their algorithm, because what David pointed out is they tried a new model for paying people in order to create a more engagement-based model. They wanted people to talk. They wanted, replies to comments. They wanted people to put information out there and other people to respond to it. The problem was they did not have the mechanism worked out immediately to go ahead and tell who was who. And so consequently, people who were creating gibberish and garbage and lies and propaganda were getting their information out and having either farmed bots or having other people interacting in their comments in a way that would generate revenue for them, but was not furthering the conversation. So I think what happened, and I think the most egregious example of an influence operation that was largely perpetrated in non-standard media is the idea of Gaza genocide. And if you look over the past year, the idea that there was a genocide in Gaza is essentially, it's a fact. If you were to look and search, if you went to Google and searched, you would find 4 pages of information supporting the idea of a Gaza genocide. Some of it's mainstream media, and the initial top ones would be, but then pages and pages and pages of lesser forms of media that were either created by Islamists, like David mentioned, Qatar is bad that way, Iran is bad that way. There are a number of folks who have an interest in distorting the actual realities on the ground to further that narrative. And I think they have been horrendously successful. I think it is one of the most painful things for anyone who supports Israel to think about, is that the enemies of Israel started a war, caused a reaction, and then benefited from that reaction. Now, we all know that that's one of Hamas and to some extent Hezbollah's methods of operation. They want their civilians to be killed so they can generate, the idea that Israel is committing a genocide against their people. But the way it went this time, the virality of those messages and the continual garbage information coming out, pushed by Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, all of the usual suspects, but just sucked up by the major outlets. How many major media outlets quoted the Gaza Health Ministry for casualty information during this war? Everyone who did committed journalistic malpractice and malfeasance because they know better. But it suited a narrative that they wanted. And in some cases, many of them are being paid, they're being influenced. And to a large extent, the people who are in major positions of power in the media, both on the left and even on the right in conservative media, learned their trade in American universities, which are hotbeds of leftist radicalism and Islamist thought. There is no university of note in the United States that does not, probably other than AJU, that does not have a horrendous bias against the state of Israel, basically anti-Semitic, and treats all of the information about that conflict through a lens that distorts it in a way no person who's paying attention with an above room temperature IQ, given the facts, would support. But they're not given the facts. And so now we've got a tremendous echo chamber where this information goes flying in, and it's amplified and redistributed and creates a reality of its own, because there is no genocide in Gaza. There absolutely is not. And I think for anyone who wants the simple talking point against that, I'm former US military. In Iraq, in the war in urban combat, the US military killed 4 times as many civilians per terrorist killed as the IDF has in Gaza. And that's verifiable facts from the US government. And even if you could even take the Gaza Health Ministry numbers, and it's still going to be a larger number. So we've got the ability for Islamists to create a reality starting in the university. So even not just the journalists, anyone who passes through 4 years of American higher education comes out either toughened, if they have the ability to wear enough armor to avoid this, but more than likely influenced into thought patterns and ideas that do not in any way reflect the history of the region or the reality of the current time. So I would say that's the negative side of it. The positive side is there is a resurgent, and as David mentioned, we're now in kind of a 2.0 version of social media. And in that, it's kind of the rise of the right. There was always a disconnect. The media for the past 40 years has been left of center and now far left of center. Now you've got at least some credible voices putting out information, and you've got X as a platform that tends to support and allow that rather than minimizing it. And there are more, podcasts and other places where younger generations, Gen Z, doesn't go to mainstream media. They get their information online. So there is a resurgence, I think, of conservative and right-wing thought in a way that creates what I want, which is a balanced playing field of ideas in the information space. And I think that's something anyone who believes in rational thought should support. I don't want a partisan propaganda space for anyone. I want the best ideas of the left and the right to fight it out in the public square and let people decide for themselves. And I think that should be a goal for everyone involved in, public policy or their own, desire for a better world. So if I can just say one thing is, it's not easy. My son-in-law, who is left of center, asked me, what is the conservative alternative to the Washington Post? And I said, there isn't one. There absolutely is not one. We need one, but there isn't one. So you have to dig a couple layers deeper and find credible voices and vet them yourselves, and ask friends and do those kind of things. But there are voices now that at least are going to pass positive information for you to evaluate and then dig into yourself and look at both sides of any issue and find the reality that you accept based on your evaluation of that, not based on their attempted indoctrination of you. And I would say that's a good state of play and a path forward.
No, I think what both of you are saying reflects the fact that much of the political discussion these days is occurring on X and not in the mainstream media or even on mainstream television. When you look at Elon Musk's X account, he has 201 million followers, which is more than the total number of voters in the 2020 election. And you say, well, what about Taylor Swift? She must be even more popular. Taylor Swift has 95 million. So Elon Musk has twice as many, more than twice as many. Donald Trump has 91 million. Joe Biden has 36 million. And Tucker Carlson has 14 million, which is small in relation to those numbers I just gave you. But with the algorithm that X uses to push out to people on X who they think might be interested in something. When Tucker Carlson did his interview with Daryl Cooper, who blamed World War II on Churchill and spoke favorably of Adolf Hitler, that went not only to Tucker Carlson's 14 million, but 34 million was the total number of views of that particular session with Tucker. So X it's more than a platform. It's something that is circulating information throughout the blogosphere or the internet or whatever. So unfortunately we only have a few minutes left. So I want each of you, if you could, to give our audience maybe 2 or 3 or at least one website that you think people ought to go to who are interested in getting either a conservative or a liberal or center or neutral or whatever you think are the sites that people ought to know about. Jim, go ahead, and then we'll turn to David.
I think I'm going to go ahead and tell you about Upward News, which if you just look for Upward News on X, you'll find it. It's a gentleman named Ari David. He does a tremendous job of kind of the Axios of the right. He's probably a couple steps right of center. He's pro-Israel. He takes issues and explains them, in a way that the left tends to explain them and places them in a propaganda model more often than not, I think. And I'm biased. I'm conservative. I admit that, though. That's the difference, I think, in a lot of things. I see through a conservative filter, and then I try to find other sources that disagree with me to go ahead and show me the flaws in my argument. But I like to find people like upward news where they're going ahead and not placing it into an ideological filter. They're explaining it to you based on these are the facts, these are the implications, these are the reasons you should be paying attention to this, and these are some more things to think about. And so if you can, I would subscribe to it. I hope he succeeds, because I want more sites like that that are willing to place the information out there without the spin and let people ingest it and think about it for themselves.
Okay, David, unfortunately we are out of time, but I definitely want you to be able to give 1, 2, or 3 websites to our audience that they might check.
Sure. I'll give one, which is Tablet. I think Tablet is the essential website, the essential Jewish, and frankly, not even exclusively Jewish website that's around today. I followed him since the beginning, and it is the place for heterodox, super smart, um, wonderful coverage of the region. I would also recommend the Scroll, which is Tablet's Substack, which gives a daily breakdown of the news. And so tabletmag.com and the Scroll at Substack.
Okay, well, thank you both. I'll use the moderator's privilege here to recommend Barry Weiss's Free Press, which is an extremely useful source of information. And ask all the audience to tune in again next week, October 14th, same time, and then October 21st, when we'll conclude this series. Jim, David, thank you very, very much. We appreciate the enlightening conversation.